Deathless Beasts is a 2022 novel by Andrew D. Meredith, and it is book 1 in the Kallatian Saga. This is a book that I hadn't, I don't know, I had much interest in for that long of a time, though I always paid attention to T from Narrative Adventures' thoughts, right, on no sexual content nor cursing. I don't have qualms with that stuff in my books, necessarily, though I do prefer it not to be there in some cases, so... say, like, The Lord of the Rings, though, also doesn't have either of those things, and it is the best book, so that is good enough for me. So anyways, this book, I think, does a really good job of just starting out here with some of the strengths, and that is it shows faith in religion better than most epic fantasy. When I say most, I mean, like, the vast majority of it. Way better than almost all other epic fantasy as far as portrayal of religion, which epic fantasy, I would say, tends to ignore it or dehumanize it, even though it's a universal human experience for pretty much all of human existence. That's my anthropology hat going on there. That being said, it shows the gambit of religion too, right? The abuses, its laurels, as well as inner doubts of faith in each individual person. Also the idea of diligence, dealing with doubts and dealing with grief and whatnot, and how that would work in a religious person. So, and it's all handled rather well, really well, exceptionally well. So the book itself is also not overly long, which I also really appreciate in epic fantasy, where often bloat is considered a feature, and there is none of that here. The book also is heavy on world building, but really sans the exposition. It's a bit like Malazan in that sense. There is a glossary at the back for help with that. There are also entries from in-world texts that act as epigraphs for each chapter. The characters offer also a good variety. We have Hannon and Ralia and their brother and sisters, and their mercenaries in the Black Sentinels. It's the family tradition, essentially, and they have a strong sense of loyalty. We also have Janid Brostein, a paladin of the hammer, probably my favorite character in the batch. He is very interesting, very authentic in his desires for goodness and to be a virtuous person, but to be also effective as a paladin. Paladin in a sense of, like, D&D, I guess, right? Another character is Kallatian Barrow, a paladin of the Rose. The title paladin, I will be honest, bothered me more than it should have. At least its meaning is obvious, and I will not die on this hill, but yeah. Anyways, a couple of nitpicks would also be that, like, and then again, this doesn't matter at all for the story, but the singular is Oryx and not Oric. Oric is not a word, technically. The plural is Oroxen, or Oroxes, if you would. So, sorry, that is my pedantry. It's exactly like ox and oxen. Anyways, also, since I did listen to the audiobook, Gorget is Gorget. It is not Gorget. If it was a modern French baryon, it would be Gorget, but it's from Old French. It's Gorget. Anyways, those are nitpicks. They don't matter. And in reality, actually, those are, like, the only thing that I didn't like about the experience of reading this, and those are almost nothing, right? Those are just Liam pet peeves coming in here. So anyways, all the characters thrive, but separately, and I think they're properly foiled and developed. They're in separate places most of the time, but each plotline is not wasted and is rather exciting. Though this does in some ways feel like a first book. There is some action early on, but typical to the genre of epic fantasy, I should say, it takes some time to gain some real momentum. Though in parts it becomes, it's because of the form really being a mosaic of point of views, really doing their own things, kind of slices of life in this world, if you will. Also in large part because of the various religious folks, be they warriors or pacifists. It feels kind of like some medieval romances, which read a lot like modern fantasy novels, which actually, if you read medieval romance, if you never have, a lot of them actually do change to different characters, continue those adventures. I recommend reading them if you haven't. But I'd also say plus scripture is important to some of these characters, I should say. Reminiscent of the most popular book in our world, the Bible. And the huge number of Christians that exist in the world. Also, mega points to Meredith for being hopeful, right? Even with all the emotion in the story. I mean, Like I saw a couple reviewers mention women supporting women. That is present along with men being manly and hugging and crying. All right. But overall, the book has this nice vibe, if you will, to it. At times, it does, again, feel like kind of a modern Arthurian romance, except sans all the Arthurian names. And it's not, of course, in our world. It's in Kallatian, with its own cosmology and history. And that really comes out. It's focused on the story of the characters and the world. It sort of feels like you're sitting around a hearth fire and hearing your people's history and tradition being told to you. The story is larger than any individual, and it is a story worth retelling, of course. Also, in some ways, it reminded me of Crown of Stars, mostly in the religious aspects. And Bread Day reminded me of Lammas, which is a real holiday. And also reminded me of something like Codville a little bit, or The Name of the Rose. And as soon as I finished it, I had the thought, to be honest, this feels worthy of a reread. So I did reread it. I've never done that for another book, and I did wish I had a physical copy of this book to appreciate. It is very enjoyable. In some ways, it's not a book that I fell in love with, but it's a book I enjoyed very much. And it is a book I felt like I could love, if you will. And I should say, actually, as of recording this review, I've already read the second book, and I enjoyed it even more than that first book. Leave from Lyceum.